Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guests, we provide the knowledge, skills, insight, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. So, this week's episode was a little surreal for me because of all the parallels between this guest story and my own. I've been a longtime fan of Shinah Cheng's potty mouth calligraphy, and so I'm super thrilled to have her on the show today to chat about her transition out of biglaw into the wild and wacky world of calligraphy. She's a Harvard-trained former attorney who left it all behind to build crooked calligraphy and has worked with businesses such as Disney and Nordstrom's. The reality is that tons of you reach out to me because you know that your current situation just isn't working, but you really don't know how to get from where you are to where you want to be. So this week's episode, we really dive into Shinah's story. Like a lot of lawyers, she hadn't spent much time growing up thinking about the things that brought her joy or really how she wanted to be spending the days of her life. She had kind of done what she was supposed to do, followed the path, was trying to make her parents proud. She'll go into all the details of her story, but I think she fell into the traps that a lot of us fall into. And through her journey, she learned a lot about herself. She's built a life and a business that she now feels is much more aligned with who she believes she is. So I really hope you guys enjoy the show and get so much value out of this conversation. Here's Shinah. Welcome back to the show, lawyers. I am so excited to have you guys here because I have an amazing guest on today. I am really excited to introduce Shinah Cheng to the show. Welcome, Shinah.
Hey, I'm really happy to be here.
Well, let's dive in. I would love if you could start with just a brief description of who you are and what it is that you do.
Okay. Well, I started my career as a corporate securities lawyer. I worked at Aiken Gump in New York and LA for 6 years, and now I'm a foul-mouthed calligrapher. I mean, that's kind of the brief, summary. But yeah, now I have a calligraphy business. I'm a calligraphy artist, but in sort of an unconventional way. I don't do sort of the typical weddings and events and stuff. I do work with clients anywhere from small boutiques here in Los Angeles all the way up to like big brands like Disney and Dom Perignon. But I also, a big chunk of my business is teaching calligraphy. And that I do in a sort of fun, approachable, irreverent way. I'm trying to teach calligraphy sort of not as that really traditional, rigid stuff that everybody thinks of it as, but as a really sort of modern, amazing way to just like get into your creativity. So that's kind of the purpose and the why underlying what I do. Is I was starved of creativity for so long and I did not know how to get back in touch with it. So I really want to help people to do that, whether it's through calligraphy or anything else that their sort of heart is calling them towards.
I'm really excited to dive into that because for the people who've been listening to the show for a long time, they know that calligraphy is actually one of the things that pulled me out of kind of my lawyer funk, was taking an online calligraphy class. So we will dive into that. But before we go there, let's start with your legal journey. I was also a securities lawyer at a top firm in New York. So I'm quite familiar with that journey. We both went to New York law schools. How did you end up at law school?
Oh, for the reason that I'm sure a lot of people ended up in law school. I didn't know what else to do. And I had been on such a traditional sort of step-by-step path. I'm Korean American. My mom was a total tiger mom. If anybody doesn't know what that means, it means just very focused on my education, very into my life. Sort of every moment of my childhood was scheduled. And I had tutors for everything. I played classical piano for 13 years. I just wasn't allowed to quit. I got a perfect score on the SATs, actually, because I studied that test for 4 years and sort of broke it all down. And that was the goal. The whole goal of my childhood was to get into an Ivy League university. So I worked for that and hung my value on that. And that was sort of everything that made me worthwhile and everything that I did. And I did get into Harvard University, sort of that was the dream. And I got onto campus. I was like, now what? Like, what do I do with myself? Like, I've sort of achieved everything, that I was working towards. I had never asked myself the questions, what do I really want to do with my life? Like, what do I even really like? to
Mm-hmm.
do in my spare time. I'm sure this is like familiar to a lot of the lawyers out there. So I just studied psychology in undergrad because I found it interesting. It was fascinating.
Are we the same person?
I know.
Please continue.
Yeah. But I didn't, at the end of undergrad, I sort of knew I didn't want to be a clinical psychologist and I didn't want to be in academia for the rest of my life. So I still had no idea what I wanted to do. So I went and taught English in Japan for 2 years. So I lived in Kyoto. It was great. It was amazing. But I still, through all that time, did not know. I just didn't have the tools to really ask myself what I wanted to do. And I didn't have the courage to really go for something really out of the box. Just didn't have it in me. So I went to law school. I applied. I put barely any effort into it, but I did, I had such a good record. I got into NYU. So I went to NYU and I didn't love law school, although it was very challenging and I met great people. The subject matter was not sort of where my heart was. But even in law school, there's a path laid out for you, just like there was a path laid out for me in undergrad, sort of leading up to undergrad. And it's the big corporate law firms. So I ended up in a big corporate law firm. And I really, really admired the people that I was working with. I mean, the people in the sort of top law firms in New York and in big cities are some of the smartest, most capable, quick thinking people ever committed. But yeah, it was, if you know law firm life, you do. It was a really, really hard life. And that job sucks up everything. So there's not really room for anything else. And I did that in New York for about 3 years. And then I kind of burned out. I decided I needed a change. I had just broken up with my law school boyfriend. And I was like, okay, what do I do? I'm going to go back to LA. I grew up in Los Angeles. My family was still there. I'm going to move back there. I transferred with my law firm. I thought, things are going to be a little bit more laid back in Los Angeles versus New York. And it was a little bit, people left the office a little bit earlier in Los Angeles, but they were still logging in at home. It was sort of still the same lifestyle. And I worked with a lot of the same partners. And I did that for 2 more years until I just reached a point where I couldn't do it anymore and something had to change.
Let's go with that. What was that like? I mean, I feel like so many people reach that point and then just keep pushing through. You know what I mean? You see a lot of people who are really unhappy and they just keep supporting that unhappiness with their choices. Yep. What allowed you to, what was that point like for you?
It was probably just a gradual building up until I couldn't take it anymore. But if I were to, put sort of a breaking point on it, I remember working with a New York partner on an IPO, and it was just sort of a really intense, few months where I was literally in the office just until 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock.
Well, IPOs are the worst.
Yeah, I know. And there are these deadlines, and I had been doing that for a really long time. And my birthday came up. My parents had sort of planned this nice birthday dinner for me at a restaurant, nothing extravagant because they knew I couldn't stay long, but they were there. And I couldn't go at the last minute. I just there was a deadline. We had to get things done. We had to turn things in. I was running stuff. I couldn't go. So my parents brought me a piece of my own birthday cake to my office. And I literally had to take the cake and then shoo them out of the office because I was so frazzled and I was so I had to get things done. And after that was what the hell? My parents came to me and brought this piece of birthday cake to me in my office. I shooed them out of the way. And then I was in the office at 4 a.m. shoveling strawberry chiffon or whatever it was into my mouth. And I think that was sort of maybe the tipping point. I didn't immediately, march into the partner's office the next day and quit. But that started to really trickle into my consciousness. And I just remember driving into the office every morning and feeling like my life was not worth living as it was.
Yep.
And not that I wanted to kill myself or that I was thinking of anything like that, but the thought was in there that this is not worth doing anymore.
Yeah, something had to change at that point.
Yes.
So from that point to when you left, I guess, where does calligraphy fall into this? Was that something you were already doing, or is that something you learned
God,
Yes.
no. No. I mean, I say calligraphy is my passion now and that I sort of found it, but that really simplifies it. The truth is, it was such a complicated and winding journey. And it was a journey where I could not see the end. And that's what made it so, so hard. I mean, I know you've said in the past, like us lawyers, we like to have our plan and we like to have our steps in front of us, even if, the reality of the world is things don't go to plan. We still like to have that as our safety blanket. But I had to take that transition really, really slow. I sort of thought about it for a really long time. And then I finally sort of, went to my lead partner's office and said, look, I'm feeling really burned out. I need a little time off. I took, I think, maybe 2 weeks of just time off. I came back. He agreed to give me sort of an informal kind of part-time, thing where I was technically still full-time, but I was sort of not taking on very much. And I was leaving earlier in the day and I just didn't have as much on my plate. And I did that for a little while. And then at the end of that period, I had to make the decision of, do I go back to full-time or do I do something else? And at that point, I was finally ready to be like, okay, I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to quit. And it was terrifying and I had no idea what was going to happen next. But I did finally feel ready to take that leap. And a lot of people say sort of taking a leap, into a new career journey. And that sounds like you just kind of ran and flung yourself off the abyss without any idea of what was going to happen. But no, I mean, I took a calculated leap. So, I'm still a lawyer. I'm still like pretty risk averse. I had to have certain things in place for me to feel safe enough to take that leap. And that's what I try to tell people, is that it's not like a heroic thing. It just is getting things in place to make you feel comfortable for your situation.
Yeah. What were those things?
So for me, that was, I had saved up quite a bit of money. I had about $100K, just saved up because I had been I'm naturally frugal. So I had just been living below my means. I still had law school debt. I still had like 50 or 60K in law school debt, but I was paying a really low interest rate at the time. So I figured I could sort of keep doing that. But that cash cushion made me feel safe. I had good relationships. I left my firm on good terms, and I had good relationships with some other partners that had gone to other firms. And I knew a lot of friends in sort of various companies and other firms. I was pretty sure that I could come back to law if I wanted to. I even worked out with my law firm, maybe I could do some contract work sort of here and there to sort of ease my transition. I went and moved in with my best friend in Los Angeles into the second bedroom of his condo, and he charged me a very low rent. So I had that. And I knew that my family, would not let me die homeless in the gutter. So even though that was where my brain was going, right? You do these things and your brain, the fear takes you always to this like dramatic, you're going to die situation. But part of that was sort of looking at that fear and really letting it go to its conclusion and then questioning it. And
how
saying,
did your mom take all this?
With great anxiety. She wasn't going to tell me what to do with my life. And I think she always held on to the hope that I would go back to law. Mm-hmm. So in the beginning, it was, okay, so you're taking a little break, but you're going to go back to law, right? When are you going to go back? Are you thinking about going back now? It was just constantly for 2 or 3 years. When are you going to go back to law? And she's sort of now come to grips with the fact that I'm probably not going to go back to law and that I'm doing okay. But yeah, no, it was hard for her. And it was a loss of security for me and a loss of prestige, frankly. She couldn't sort of tout me as like the big corporate lawyer anymore. And I think overall, she was just worried for me. So that was sort of hard, but my parents never stood in my way. They worried and they asked questions, but they never cut me off or, I always knew that they would support me if I needed. So that was important.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And I think that it's great that you kind of trusted that. Because I think sometimes, to your point about that hyperbolic belief that you're going to end up homeless under a bridge kind of thing, and that everyone's going to leave you out to like die.
Yes.
It's nice to be able to rein that in and say, but really, even as upset and disappointed or scared as my parents may be, they're not going to let it get to that point. And you're lucky not just to have those people, but to be willing to believe in them and lean on them if you needed it.
Yes. So I had all of those things, and even on top of that, I found sort of part-time seasonal work to bring in some income while I was figuring stuff out. So I gave myself a year to just explore and not expect anything of myself and just rest. I figured I had deserved that after 32 years of working my butt off. But I, after that, found a sort of like a college application job. So I was helping students with their college applications, getting paid decently for that. So I sort of had that seasonally to bring in some income. So I wasn't watching my savings dwindle like so quickly that it freaked me out. And I have to add one really, really important thing that I did to help me through this whole transition period was I found a life coach. And her, I found sort of by luck and happenstance, she was teaching a watercolor course that I had signed up for. But I connected with her because she had a similar background. She had also left a very demanding corporate world and gone into something totally different, teaching art and this kind of stuff. And so I trusted her, as a good coach for me. And she was really the one who helped me to drill down into those fears and really figure out where they were coming from. And then beyond that, to really drill down into the beliefs that I had had and grown up with my entire life and really examine those and ask if those are true. Beliefs like, I am only worth my accomplishments, or I am not good enough unless I'm the absolute best, or even a really fundamental belief that the world is a really hard and terrible place and you have to work your butt off in order to survive and carve out a safe space for yourself. And I think a lot of these were beliefs that I, got from my parents, and I don't blame them at all or anything. That was sort of the best they could do. And that was probably the world that they grew up in, just being sort of born around the time of the Korean War and immigrating to the US and sort of carving out a life for themselves here. But that was the kind of stuff that was keeping me stuck and so afraid to leave that corporate law job, even though I was very, very unhappy.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because in working, so my mom is Chinese, so similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's why we have a lot of similarities in our stories. And one of the stories that I really continue to struggle with, and this is even not that negative, but it's just all good things in life take hard work.
Yes.
And so I think that everything is supposed to be hard, and nothing worth having is easy. And you just say that and you don't see the harm in that belief, because you're like, good, it teaches kids to be disciplined, it teaches people to work hard, but it leads me to not value the things that come easy to me in life, and to sometimes overcomplicate things because I don't think I deserve things that are easy. It's very for me is for a hornet's nest.
Yes. And you see it everywhere. I mean, it's not just that your parents or whatever, it's in the hustle, grind, work hard, play hard mentality.
And if you just outwork them, right? Like what people always say, if you can't be better than them, you can always work harder than them. And I'm like,
yes. And tied to that, really closely tied to that, is this idea that working hard and establishing a secure place for yourself is more important than happiness. Happiness is sort of a frivolous kind of maybe you'll get that later in life someday when you've sort of done all this stuff and worked really hard and established something for yourself, then you can enjoy the happiness. And that, I think, was what kept me in the corporate law job for a really long time. Was okay, it's hard now.
Yep, this is how it's supposed to be. Yes. This is the hard part of life.
I'm paying my dues.
Correct.
I'm learning stuff. Maybe as a partner, it'll be better. One day I'll go in-house and I'll earn a cushy salary and I won't have to work as hard, and I'll have a big house and I'll be married and I'll have children, and then I'll be happy. And it so doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it's as if a level of ease and peace and joy in your life you have to work for. You don't just deserve it.
Right. And I feel like you do have to work for it, but it's an inner... Yes. It's an inner work. And that's really, really hard for someone who has been so externally focused my entire life. So, I mean, the life coach was definitely helped me sort of crack that open a little bit. And then as I've been through this journey of, we haven't even gotten to the calligraphy part, but I explored all sorts of creative things. I started a bunch of things that sort of didn't pan out so much. And then I found calligraphy actually in a calligraphy workshop. And it just clicked for me as this perfect marriage of creativity. But then it also has these bounds. Like your stuff has to be legible at the end of the day. The A has to look like an A. So I don't think I could ever be like a fine oil painter, but calligraphy spoke to me. So I built it from there. But I think really what has helped me to really transition into having a successful business is the mindset stuff, is examining all those beliefs. And I am still struggling with it, but I'm learning more to prioritize fun and play and do that and see where it leads me. And sometimes it leads to some really good stuff that you could never get to through just hard work and grinding and doing the same old thing over and over. And that's kind of a revelation, something that I've really had to wrap my mind around. And it's taken a couple years, but I think it's so, so important.
What does that look like for you? Because I try to have a word each quarter. I know a lot of people do a word for the year, but I'm too I'm an overachiever. I accomplished my word in just 3 months. I'm actually very ADD. And play was actually my word for the second quarter. Yeah. And I have kids. So for me, play is almost easier because I can kind of play with them. But what does that mean for you to kind of make that space? Because we have such a focus on being productive and like life hacking and like making the most of every minute and like scheduling and planning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really been a work in progress. I have a few sort of like I hate to call them mantras, but they kind of are. They're just sort of phrases that I remember in my head. One of them is follow the fun. And a second one is alignment before action, which I won't get too into the woo-woo stuff, but the alignment before action idea is not so crazy, actually. It's this idea that like, if you're just sort of in this frazzled, stressed out, same old hustle mentality, and you're just kind of working on one thing after the other and grinding it out, what's the quality of your work? What's the quality of your big ideas when you're running a business? It's just stress doesn't do good things for that. So, it kind of follows that if you get into sort of a good space mentally, you maybe do some exercise, you have a leisurely morning, you like have a little impromptu dance party, whatever it is to get yourself happy, stuff will flow better. And that's very hard to reconcile for somebody who is really about like checking off things off the to-do list. But one strategy is I stopped trying to schedule and plan my mornings. I know that there are a lot of creatives out there, and there are a lot of people who swear by morning creative routines. I have discovered that I'm not a routine person. So I don't set an alarm in the morning. I wake up when I wake up. I sort of take it easy. I make my coffee. I maybe listen to a podcast that makes me happy. I really ask myself, and listen, what would make me happy right now to do? And I try and do that thing, at least for a little bit. And then I will find that I get to a place where I want to get into that studio and hammer out some emails and write some copy and, create content for my online course. I get into a space where I really want and I feel inspired to do the work, and it goes so much faster and easier. So I aim for that. It doesn't always happen. And sometimes I wake up and there's just a million things to do and I just, feel like I got to get to that. Sometimes I don't set my alarm, but I jump out of bed at 6 a.m. anyway because I'm so worried about things. So I'm not saying that life is perfect and I've got it all figured out, but I try to tell myself, okay, if I'm doing this and I've left my corporate law job where I was working so hard for someone else and I've made this change, why am I doing this if it's not fun?
Yeah, completely. You could have not fun somewhere else.
Yeah.
There are lots of not fun places to make money.
And it's not to say I have fun all the time and I'm joyful and ecstatic, but it is something that guides me and sort of guides my sort of larger choices and strategies and where I want to take my business.
As the host of a podcast called The Happy Lawyer Project, you can imagine that I I really appreciate that as a guiding principle. As I alluded to earlier, calligraphy was actually one of the first things my life coach had me do when I started working with her, because I was kind of in that exploration space that you were talking about. And one of the things that I loved when I was younger was Chinese class, because I loved making the little characters and like just over and over again, the repetition of it, and like it's like creative without being too creative and fitting them. I love little shapes and little grids, little grid paper really spoke to me. And so she thought that would be a great idea. And actually, it was amazing because it was the first thing in my life really that I could remember doing that didn't have a purpose. Like I wasn't doing it for I wasn't doing it because I needed to calligraphy my wedding invitations. I wasn't doing it to like start a business or to put on my resume. Wasn't doing it to surprise, because sometimes I take dance lessons to surprise my husband or like, do all these things for other people. And it was the first thing in my entire life I did just because it was something that interested me with absolutely no goal other than to do it because it might be fun. And it was like the gateway drug to fun for me.
So interesting to hear.
So can you tell us a little about your calligraphy course and kind of what you're doing in your business and touch on that really briefly?
Yeah, I actually started out my business with sweary greeting cards.
Sweary.
They have all sorts of swear words and curse words on them, but they're written in beautiful calligraphy. So, it's not so bad. They were something a little unusual and something I hadn't seen a lot of before. And it was an easy way to start. I've since sort of pivoted because I decided I didn't want to actually run a wholesale greeting card company. That's a totally different business model. So now I am more in the education space. So the main thing that I do now is run online courses teaching calligraphy. And teaching calligraphy is sort of a broad term, but it's sort of any decorative writing. What I do is specifically that really cool, you might have seen this maybe on Instagram, but it's like a pointy, it's got a pointy metal nib on the end, and there's a little elbow coming out of the pen, and you dip it into actual like real ink, and you like push it on the paper, and stuff flows, and it's amazing. So there's been a real resurgence of interest in that. I think just everything's so digital that people are really drawn to this very handcrafted artisanal sort of art. And it's been traditionally a very formal, sort of rigid, very elegant, but like, you have to stick to the rules, and the P has to look like a P, and you have to slant it a certain way. And I am just much more drawn to a modern, playful, sort of break the rules kind of calligraphy. So that's the way that I teach it. Like my worksheets have the words Klingon and nincompoop and fart, because why not? I mean, like while you're doing all sorts of practice and repetition, like why not come across a word that just brings a smile to your face? That's kind of how I approach teaching. It's how I approach my business. My whole business, Crooked Calligraphy, has that tone to it where it's not so serious, but then it's some of the most important stuff in your life, getting in touch with that creativity and getting in touch with that child in you who did stuff just because it was fun and it was interesting. And when was the last time you did that?
Completely. And I think that something like for lawyers who are stuck and who feel like they don't know how to get out of that kind of intellectual space and don't know what they love anymore because it's been so long since they thought about it, or maybe they've never really asked themselves those questions. The thing I loved about the course was it allowed me to be creative, but there was structure around it. Because if you had told me at that stage in my life, go do something creative, I would have just sat there and stared like into the abyss for hours because I literally wouldn't have known where to begin. And even if I had bought the materials myself, it probably wouldn't have given me the same as a student type A type, what I mean? Having the like homework and having like lessons and having a schedule, I could follow it. And it was very meditative. I would just sit there and do my pages and do my letters and do my swirls. And it just felt really good.
Oh, I so hear you. I mean, I think creativity is so important to me now, but when I was working as a lawyer, I tried desperately to bring creativity into my life. And I just would buy things like, maybe I'll try jewelry making. And I would go and buy whatever I thought I might need for that. And then it would sit in my closet, and just like the craft supplies would just pile up. Like I
And
thought
that
I
just
was
makes
going to
you feel
sew.
bad.
Yes, it just is like guilt staring at every time I walked by that closet. I was like, should be doing something. And it's like the opposite of creative joy, right? I would only do things if they had a specific purpose. Like I created paper flowers for my sister's wedding. It was a deadline. It was a specific thing. I had to do it.
Yep.
Those were the only, I would knit, but only if I was giving
Yep.
a scarf to someone. I would, make a DIY project only if it had a specific purpose in my house. That was my creativity. And I still struggle with that. I mean, I've turned calligraphy into a business. It's not, it's not just for fun anymore. It's very strategic. And I do things to make money in my business. So I'm still wrestling with that. I'm just saying this. So, everyone out there was like, oh, creativity, like, how do I get into my life? Like, I understand how hard it is, but I think I would have benefited a lot from working with a coach or someone who could just help me. I mean, I did sort of see a therapist for a little while, but that was a little, I don't know.
I had the same coaching is what I didn't need therapy. I needed coaching because for me, I love my parents. My parents are fantastic, amazing, supportive people, but they didn't have the skills to kind of move me through the American school system.
Mm-hmm.
And as an achiever and a goal-oriented person, I just kind of was on that treadmill and just going along without any real introspection.
Yeah.
And a coach will do that. There was nothing wrong with me. I just needed guidance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I totally agree. And I look back at my life with no regrets. I mean, I wouldn't do it even though I went into so much debt for law school and I'm not using it now. And people ask me that all the time. Like, do you regret going to law school? I don't. That was the path that I had to take. And I think I had to do it that way. I wasn't ready when I was 22 or 23. I was ready when I was 33 to finally sort of look at some stuff. But yes, I think that creativity is not just sort of this magical external thing that you can just go and get somehow in the way that we as overachievers are used to going and getting and doing everything else.
Yep.
It does have to start inside.
Well, we also, I think, sometimes forget that we spent our entire lifetimes nurturing our intellectualism and our perfectionism and all of those sides of ourselves. And we've let that creative muscle kind of atrophy. Mm-hmm. So to expect ourselves to just be at the same level creatively as we are professionally just doesn't make any sense. So unless you're nurturing your relationships, you're nurturing your creativity, you're taking care of your health, like all of those things take time. We talk about professional development all the time, but we never talk about personal development. And it takes just as much work. And you have to do it. You have to actively engage in that development for it to happen. Right. Otherwise you stagnate.
Yes. Yeah. And it does take knowing yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's so hard to question and really get into when you're working so hard and you're so focused on your work and on all those external sort of achievements and things that bring you they bring some happiness. Definitely. There are definite moments of happiness when I would get praise and do a good job and succeed in things. But then that would always fade. And for me, the problem that I wanted to solve the most was I would get occasionally a free weekend when I was a corporate lawyer. And instead of being like, yay, a free weekend, what am I going to do? I would be like, oh no, what am I going to do with this weekend?
Yep.
And then I would go through a cycle of well, I should go exercise. It's good for me. But I don't really feel like doing that. So instead I'm going to make this huge breakfast and eat that and then maybe end up sitting on the couch all day. And then I would spend the whole day just in guilt and critiquing myself. So that's the attitude that I had to sort of get under and change before I could look out and say, what creative stuff is going to make me happy?
So we've talked so much about the importance of mindset and dealing with this personal stuff and this, looking inside. Are there any resources that you would recommend? You spoke a little about listening to podcasts in the morning, perhaps, or for those out there who are trying to tap into that creativity, who are trying to find that space in their life, what would you suggest?
Yeah. So my friend sort of signed me up for this course called Awakening Joy, and it came with a book. and you would sort of read the book and kind of get an email and you don't have to do it together with the course. You can just buy the book by itself. It's called Awakening Joy. It's by James Baraz. The title sounds very hokey. And I think I was a little tempted to just be like, like a self-help book. I don't know. But it actually is a lovely book. And it draws on a lot of his real experience working with people. And it offers a lot of concrete tips. One thing, I'll just give an example that has stuck in my mind is changing one word in a sentence. So it's changing I have to I get to. And it can be something as simple as I have to take out the trash versus I get to take out the trash. Yep. And it sounds kind of silly, but in your head, it switches you to like, oh, I get to take out the trash. Like I have trash that I get to take out somewhere. I can walk. I can go outside. I don't know. It just opens up a little bit of that gratitude muscle. So that was really helpful. I love the Don't Keep Your Day Job podcast by Kathy Heller. And I'm very, very open to the message now. I don't think I would have been quite as open back when I was working as a lawyer, but if you can sort of keep an open mind, she's very much about you have something special about you that you need to share with the world, or that you can share with the world if you want to. So it's just inspirational. And if you're open to it, she really does have, I think she comes from a set of beliefs that's very, very different maybe than a lot of like lawyers have sort of gone through life with. And then finally, I really, really love The Lively Show by Jess Lively. It's another podcast. And what's impactful about that podcast is it's sort of real time. It follows her as she does go from more of a sort of traditional view on life into more of an expansive view on life. And I think that gives it a lot of worth because you can sort of go along on that journey with her. And she has changed a lot of my mindset about a lot of things. And then finally, it's, working with a coach has been invaluable.
I love Jess Lively, but I would warn people that if you start listening to Jess Lively right now, it might be a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally.
So you may want to go back a couple of years and then work your way up to current day Jess Lively.
Yes, I totally agree. Oh, there's also, if all of that is sounding a little sort of too candy and woo-woo, there's also a book called You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. Yeah, yep. That is a bit more of that's kind of a lot of the tone that I take with my business, but it kind of presents in a way that is not fluffy at all.
Another good book. Fantastic. And I'll leave links to all of that in the show notes at thehappylawyerproject.com so people can check those out if you are on the subway or on a jog right now. So what is the best way for people to see your work, to work with you, to learn more about what you're doing, to take your course? Where can they reach you?
So my favorite platform that I'm on almost every day is Instagram. I'm at instagram.com/crooked calligraphy. And you can also visit my website, crookedcalligraphy.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on tonight and for sharing your story with us. I've loved chatting with you and embarrassingly love hearing all the similarities in our stories, but it's like looking in the looking glasses. If I was braver, maybe I would be calligrapher.
No. I really admire what you're doing in building this community and, pushing for this. It really needs to be focused on happiness.
Well, before I let you go, the last question I just want to ask, which I ask everybody who comes on the show, is what do you think separates happy lawyers from those lawyers who struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree?
It's wanting to be happy, I think, which sounds so simple, but once you make that decision and you decide that it needs to be a priority, then you can start sort of shifting into, okay, how do I make that happen? But if it's not a priority in your life, then it's really hard to give up the old patterns in your life. So I think it's really making that decision.
That's so true. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, I had a really, really fun time chatting with you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for listening.